So there's been some rumblings across the internet and also in many cities, at least there's evidences of this, that protests are happening, that some things that are going on with the Trump administration are not liked, particularly by the left. In the wake of what is going on with U.S. aid, it may be that there's substantially less funding for some of these activities. Lucas, I know that this is something that you've looked into in the past or that you've been seeing some stuff on X about. I also want to talk about how we seem to be moving into almost a bifurcation of social media. Used to be that we had some neutral spaces where crosstalk would happen, but now it almost seems like Blue Sky and Reddit are swinging hard left, and we've got some other social medias that are swinging hard right. I'm eager to have this conversation today.
Well, I absolutely am obsessed with this topic, and I have been for a very long time. And I'm very glad to see um, actual facts being brought to light in the last several months with regards to how our conversations are manipulated. And I say that I love history, I love diplomacy, I love statecraft, and we have long known that it was there was no secret, or it was an open secret, that the United States was very interested in the fight against Russia through the Cold War, in the ideological battle between capitalism and communism, that we were promoting democracy and promoting regime changes, promoting ideas that we thought congruent with the American system throughout the world, and and that to me seemed to be very just a question of to what degree that was having an effect on American minds or American dialogue. And we have recently seen a lot of a lot of um, what the State Department through various channels was up to with regards to uh, changing the narrative, or trying to manipulate the way that issues are seen. And I'm talking specifically about the revelations with regards to USAID, the Agency for International Development, that after an agency that was created after the CIA got in trouble for doing this back in the 70s. And and so we've known that it goes on. And I say that, there's a couple of things are specifically happening that we need to keep an eye out for.
Well, I mean, this has been theorized for quite some time, right? Or at least there's been people who have accused some of these protests of being astroturf, right? That people are getting paid to be here. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that's part of the playbook. I mean, we had the CIA playbook for how regime change operations were best made in countries around the world, and that include uh, you know giving a microphone to minority and dissident voices, and you know making it as easy, or incentivizing people to show up to protests as much as possible. And that might mean that they were paid, or that there were donuts and coffee, or that there was transportation arrangements that were made to get them to protests.
And the transportation one has been, I think, one of the ones that's been identified more than anything is that they'll just go round up a bunch of people and bus them over there and then give them a hot meal or something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this probably goes on in the United States too. So, but the larger issues that I think that we need to put our finger on is how the narrative has shifted. So, going back to the Cold War era, there was long a a narrative coming from the United States that any country in the world that wasn't moving towards more democracy, towards more one person, one vote representation in their government was autocratic or fascist, or any number of pejorative terms. And it was also through the United States that things like social media, that Twitter came to be created. And it was intentional. These were tools that were intentionally created to destabilize uh, governments. The narrative is like autocratic or dictatorships or strongman governments, but really it was governments that were not working with the United States. And so we use the power of the minority under the mantle of democracy to lay the groundwork to change the regimes in those countries around the world. Um, After the Arab Spring, and the Arab Spring, fits fully into that narrative. I mean, that's whenever we saw Twitter being used in North Africa and Egypt, Tunisia, um, various other countries around the world to uh, to have a groundswell against authoritarian regimes. But in the wake of that, the United States began to see that in Europe, and that was problematic in Europe, where the countries were working with the United States, and I'm talking about Brexit specifically. So Brexit, and if we go back to Brexit, you can remember how it was poo-pooed by the diplomatic class and many talking heads. Um, and we see now too that a lot of these publications and corporate media were being funded by the United States State Department. USAID funds, as you have this tweet up here, Internews Network, $472 million budget, $472 million a year to go to network TV stations and publications of record, like the New York Times, like the Atlantic Monthly, probably the New Yorker, and to establish contacts and people with favorable viewpoints there to set narratives that that align with United States interests, and United States interest as defined by long-term bureaucrats, because long-term bureaucrats are sit in their offices, and they look at the electoral turnover in government and say, oh, this fresh representative who was a businessman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, doesn't understand our long relationship with NATO, and the history, the diplomatic history that the United States has, and the operations that we have going on around the world. And um, what we've seen in the wake, going back to Brexit, was a pivot from this concern about democracy in various countries around the world to upholding democratic institutions. And if you pay attention, you're going to hear that left and right. And there's a
Well,
big
the democratic institutions was a big thing during the campaign. I remember that this was something that was repeatedly talked about during, I think, the final months, when the Harris Walz campaign was talking about this, and the left particularly highlighted this. Did you hear it on the right? I didn't hear this coming out.
the neocons, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is why you had the neocons leave the Republicans, and the likes of Liz Cheney and many other whatever type of Republican that we're talking about. These are Republicans and Democrats that um, were aligned with the the institutional bureaucratic interest and understanding of how the world is to be run. But they don't care about how democratic it is. That's just a vestigial, uh, uh, you know, a link to to confuse people and to make them, to put it in our mind as if, oh, this is the same as democracy. It's not the same as democracy. It's very different to be setting up political organizations and countries to represent, one person, one vote, and to have people decide about their political futures, and then to turn and say, oh no, there are institutions. If in some way they're democratic, that's a pass. But we compare, or we're concerned about upholding institutional stability, and what those institutions know is better for their
It,
people.
it almost feels like a corruption of what a constitutional republic is supposed to mean, because a constitutional republic, you have representational government, right? You've got people who vote, the representative then goes out and represents a bunch of people. And in some ways, what's been happening here with these democratic institutions almost feels like they want to replace the institutions with the representatives who are elected by the people. And there's no accountability to these institutions whatsoever. It's not like you can, decide that you no longer want these democratic institutions to represent you. They just are out there doing whatever they want to do of their own accord, and who's ever in control of them. And it feels like the antithesis of what the governmental institution was supposed to be as it was conceived.
Well, even when we look at the names of our parties here, this is an old tension, and one that's been abused, before 1944, and all the way back to the creation, the writing of the Constitution. Because Republican is about stakeholders, democracy is about everybody, and that we talk about democratic republics is going back to this same sort of Orwellian doublespeak. Um, so, in some ways, they are valid. They're both valid ways to organize countries. But what we should be aware of is that America long, trumpeted the values of democracy, and then pivoted in the wake of Brexit to talk about stakeholders and institutions and stability. And not only in doing so, they did so with doublespeak that also, again, was $472 million a year, and that's just one institution that's being funded by USAID, and paying off thousands and thousands of journalists and influencers in social media. And this is when I see angry people on the left or the right, I say, oh, angry people have been, um, uh, you know, they had power has been taken from them, and instead they've been fed a line that's made to manipulate them. So when I see what goes on with Blue Sky, with Twitter revolts, um, and I see people who are very upset, and large groups of people, and sort of this crowd think that goes on amongst them, I say, oh, this is because large numbers of people are being lied to, and whether it be lies in the narrative, or factual lies. This is part of the problem that we see. I've been very glad to see the the methods come to light with what's been going on in constructing our political narrative, because to me that is the best antidote uh, to to deflate this artificial, um, conflict that's been created. And I'm not saying that there aren't valid, multiple valid ways to run the world, but uh, whenever people think that they're arguing for democracy and they're arguing for something else, um, they get angry. They get angry because they think other people are wrong. And if we have governments that are paying people and paying organizations to further confuse people who are participating in this discussion, then that's a problem. So that's what I see when I see, and it makes me it saddens me to see what goes on with Reddit because there is there is a sort of a um, uh, I don't even know what to call it, Grant. The Reddit used to be a place where any idea was open to for discussion, viewpoints were open for discussion, and any topic was on the table. And now it is to me a place of silencing and a whole lot of things that cannot be discussed.
Well, it's definitely heavily moderated, and each subreddit is kind of its own little thing. But part of what you see on Reddit, especially if you haven't gone in here and extensively configured it so that you get the echo chamber, I think it's still possible to do that. The one of the unfettered ways of looking at Reddit is to kind of browse it without any history or with not giving it any context. If you can try to divorce yourself from that and just see what the algorithm naturally serves you up, and it definitely swings a particular direction. And there's been some big broad sweeping things that have been going on within Reddit, like there's been a mass protest against X, so a lot of X links are just completely banned. If you put one in a post on many subreddits, that post just gets auto moderated off. There's like been a rise of a whole bunch of new subreddits like this one. Fed News is a pretty interesting one that started to get quite a bit of traction. I think it started out where it was just the federal workers who wanted to exchange information about whether they were being cut, what was happening with DOGE, how it might affect them. And then it started to gain momentum in kind of the same way that some of the Bernie subreddits did. It almost seems like it's an organization place for what may be one of the next political movements. So this is kind of one to check out. But yeah, there's been a widespread, I don't know if it's collusion or if it's just a lot of people starting to see the same idea and then latching on and wanting to copy it. But yeah, the ideas of content filtering, banning things, and auto moderation are starting to become very common on Reddit. And I agree, this is much different than how Reddit used to be in the past, when it was much more freeform and each community was very different from any other on their different r slash.
You make a good point about do I have a history and have I sort of curated the content? I haven't on Reddit, and I have on X, but even on X, which is my preferred medium of gathering news, because I'm not on Blue Sky, not on Mastodon, nor Threads. That is a very valid point that I've curated heavily my experience on X, but my problem in some of these other platforms is the amount of censorship that they engaged in and possibly are still engaging in. And I know that's even an issue on X, where uh, X has this narrative of they won't ban content, but they'll ban reach, and I do have issues with that. But it seems that going back to the H-1B visa debacle, and Vivek Ramaswamy left Doge, and Elon reactively banned Laura Loomer and some other conservative Maha MAGA uh, influencers on the platform. And
Why
but
did Vivek back off from Doge? I actually missed that in the news cycle. I don't think that there was a lot of hoot and cry about that. Was that kind of quietly backed out of Doge?
he I a couple of things happened. I think one, he was already looking at a gubernatorial run in Ohio, um, and and was also sort of reading the tea leaves with regards to the controversy that was going to surround Doge. And when the H-1B visa fight happened, he took a look at the Republican base and saw that they were much more nationalistic than he was. And he's I think Vivek said, I'm not going to fight this fight. That there were other things that he could agree on with Americans and with Ohioans, and he didn't want to jeopardize his run for the Ohio governorship. And so
So
rather
maybe
than
he's a little bit more politically savvy, maybe, as he's trying to protect what he's trying to do in politics. And
oh, Vivek
this paints a
Ramaswamy he's as politically savvy as an operator comes. He was
I
fully
know, and this and being in Doge, it sort of points a big target on your back, puts a big red X on you.
Yeah, and the reason that Elon has stayed in Doge is he has no pretensions for running for a political office. He's already the richest man in the world. He doesn't care who he pisses off. Um, I think Doge is going to be. I mean, again, the exposure that Doge has bought to the funding that the institutions of government thought that the American people didn't need to see has already been worth its weight in in gold, in dollars, whatever, has already been worthy. But the ability for Doge to solve the larger problems that are going on with America and to tackle the deficit, the Republicans that are in power right now are talking about funding a budget that's $7 trillion. And leading into COVID, our budget was $4.5 trillion. And rewind before all of our foreign wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and the Ukraine, our budget was less than $1 trillion. So, Republicans are going to uh, have to do more than Doge if they're going to begin to pay off the deficit and stumble into this golden era that Donald Trump talks about. And that austerity, I haven't seen Republicans begin to make the cuts that are going to be required to do that. And cutting the Department of Education isn't going to do it either.
Yeah, we're not even getting close to this, but I did hear some rumblings that Musk got his sights squarely set on some of the stuff that are these big, huge rocks that if they want to make any movement on the budget at all on the table, I know that he's actually starting to talk about that kind of stuff. Again, I wonder about whether he can actually pull these things off. I mean, it's one thing to have a notion that you want to cut spending or cut some of these entitlements, but that is an act of Congress that is required, I believe, right? Am I wrong about that? Don't they? Congress is going to need to act, and they're going to need to act with budget. And if they're not doing it within the budgetary constraints or within that that political budget passing bill process, where is it supposed to happen? Is it that they're going to kick it up to Trump, and then Trump is supposed to thin down the budget, or what is the real plan here?
Well, the House of Representatives is the most powerful legislative body. That it it sh- the budget cuts should be occurring there, but it also is problematic, and this is the problem of democracy, is that nobody wants to say no. And because we
Well,
can
this is the far right, right? The super conservatives. They're the ones that caused the big fight about the Speaker of the House, and I would imagine that they're not going to take kindly to this budget because they're super small government people. They're not going to want to see the budget expanded like this, will they?
well, the problem is that there are too many issues on the table, and again, our narrative is our political narrative and the conversation that goes on in America is easily twisted to be concerned about people, Donald Trump or Vivek Ramaswamy or Elon Musk, rather than issues. We also have the conversation parsed into a discussion about the left and the right, or Democrats and Republican, and we don't focus on issues. So those hard right Republicans are going to focus on exposing things that are going on in the government when it comes to the budget. And they're gonna pass the budget, because the real, the real costs, the high costs that our government is incurring goes towards defense and towards our social safety net, especially retirement, social security. So if they cut those programs, they're going to lose a lot of political support. And and our government, the what we need to see with Trump, and maybe they are moving closer to this, because he's talk of the golden era, stable coins, et cetera, is we need to limit the government's deficit spending. If they can continue to create debt and fund an imaginary budget, then this issue is going to continue to be a part of government, because we can't we should not expect this to happen in the budgeting process, because the budgeting process right now, there is no hard wall for them to turn to and say, oh, this is the amount that we have in the future. We have to divvy that up. That's how a budget should work. But instead, um, they look at all the programs and the amount of money that they want, and then they create that money through through debt. They create debt to pay for that, and everyone believes in that system. So as long as that happens,
Well, as long as those sales of those treasuries keep working the way that it has in the past, I mean that is how that has to actually function. And if those treasury sales don't go off, then they don't have the money, right? Or am I missing something here? Because that's ultimately what happens, and we've started to see exhaustion on buying T bills, except for maybe what stable coins keep buying, right?
well, and the stable coins are those aren't stable coins. We call them, tether. We call them stable coins, but that's just because they're pegged to the dollar. But there's nothing truly stable about them. So what we'll need to see as a solution to this is stable coins, or digital currencies that are stabilized in other ways. Like what is the revenue of the government? And
For sure. But I'm just saying, I don't know how the U.S. could continue to have these kinds of budgets unless they're able to turn around and go sell the treasuries, which convey a certain interest rate and whatever. And if there is not buying for those treasuries, then the ability to fund the government, I think that starts to fall apart. So, $7 trillion is a gobsmacking budget. Like, to imagine that there's that sort of level of appetite for buying treasuries just seems, I don't know, it seems pretty far fetched to me.
I've been digging back into history to to FDR's era, thinking about what's possible here, and partially after seeing what's been going on with the U.S. purchases of gold, Trump's discussion of the golden era, also the when Trump said they're not going to make pennies anymore because it costs 2 cents to make a penny already. That's a huge change. That's as big as the inception of ATMs, and the notion that there was electronic money to begin with. And when I think about what that means, that's a admission that we're not going to be able to bring prices in any way back down. And uh, I mean, if we're giving up on cents, and we don't even have pennies anymore, well, nickels are going to fall, dimes are going to fall, quarters are going to fall, and all of a sudden you get to a world in which prices on menus are no are floating, and no longer pegged to that powerful notion of this is the smallest this is the smallest denominator. I mean, what's a penny for? Um, and change has long been a nuisance, heavy to carry around in our pocket. And what can you buy with a penny? What can you buy with 5 cents? What can you buy with 10 cents? But our grandparents could buy an amazing amount of thing with something that small, or amazing amount of bubble gum or soda pops or God knows what, a hamburger. Um, so when I look at moves that the Trump administration is taking with regards to that, I say, oh, are we going to are we actually going to um, inflate the value of things that the government and the people hold in order to pay off the debts, and then we're going to continue on, and all of a sudden we have a new balance and what the price level and the amount of money that exists in the world is. That's I guess that's one way to solve the problem, but I think that magnitudes of money and magnitudes do have an effect. And and I worry about a world in which we walk around pretending that 100,000 is the same as one, and that has that's the same playing board or ecosystem, that ones and fractions was. I don't think it's going to be the same. But I'm afraid that's the moves that the Trump administration is making, because it's very hard to um, get people to be paid less, to get rents to go down, to get prices to go down. And I also see that in the DOGE's, turning around and firing of all this government employees. If the government had wanted to begin to lower prices and to stop the inflation that's going on in prices and the cost of living and the amount of money that exists, you would have thought they would have said, we're going to hire more people, but we're going to hire them at lower wages. And maybe put uh, maybe give different mortgage interest rates to landlords who are lowering the rents, and so these people can live at a lower price. They haven't done that.
Yeah, maybe it's this back end subsidy kind of a thing where that's what the government would do. I don't know. No, this all seems very. I don't know. This leaves a sour taste in my mouth, even contemplating some of the things that the government might contemplate doing as far as inflation, other than just reducing spending. I don't think any of this stuff is really destined to do much other than just increase the money supply continuously and to cause more inflation. I don't know. It's hard to conceive of the government really being able to do anything that's really going to reduce inflation. Seems like
Well,
everything, even the Inflation Reduction Act, increased inflation.
oh God, don't even get me started. Yeah, I mean, going back to the games that you know, the Inflation Reduction Act was actually creating money to go into the sector, and to go into especially the sector of um, roads. They built a lot of roads, a lot of infrastructure, and they said, oh, this is I mean, part of the rationalization they had for calling it the Inflation Reduction Act, because it was going to get people back to work. But um, yeah, that was just a I don't know. It didn't. There was no part of it that reduced inflation. What when I do see where I do see a future, and going back to stable coins, to me, what we see in the juncture of crypto and technology and the solutions that are at our hands uh, is we are going to see different levels of governments create their own coins or their own currencies that are pegged in stability to what their tax revenue is. And so when I think about the way out of this in the future, it's to get off of uh, one one great behemoth that we all compare the value of various things, our jobs, you know what what the values of resources are in different areas. We've got to get away from that, because the part of money in politics um, that is more important is what are the ratios of the holders of that currency. And we, instead of addressing that internal conversation, um, going back to FDR and the creation of the international system, there was the answer at the creation of that international system of, oh, in order to address internal fairness, we're going to turn to the exterior, to the other people who are involved in trade, and try to extract that from other people. And even Trump is ratcheting up tariffs because he wants to extract more from people outside of the political contract of the United States. Um, that's only the first step in triggering or forcing the conversation to be had about what the spread of money is amongst the stakeholders of the United States. So as that conversation gets ratcheted up, I think we're going to see people who are or political polities, I don't know what, governments, different levels of governments who try to isolate themselves from that system. And I think that's going to look like stable coins that are pegged to different taxing jurisdictions, and the things that are being taxed. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Makes me think about a world that would exist like that, where you have these currencies that are pegged to particular jurisdictions. But if you think about how the free flow of money can work in this crypto ecosystem, where the entire world can participate, start to wonder how they could actually keep it stable if a bunch of, I don't know, inflows start happening to it. Like, what are you really going to do at that point? It's something interesting to think about as you're positing this idea of what does it really mean to have a stable coin outside of something like the US dollar, which has been so accepted for so long that it was obvious that you should mimic it. But if that really starts to not have the stability that it's had in the past, what else would we look to as something that you could trade down to, or that you could view as a some alternative currency that you could trade against? It's an interesting thought. I'm really gonna have to think some more about that, because it's an interesting concept.
The other day, or just yesterday, I saw a post that I thought was interesting, and it was some highlights from some internal treasury discussions uh, back in the wake of FDR's New Deal, and after FDR confiscated all the gold, there were discussions about uh, how are we going to how are we going to control the price of gold, or to get away from some of the traps that you just mentioned. And it's interesting that they talked about the creation of futures markets, and how it would, if you could get people that were betting on the future prices of gold, and not actually taking custody of gold, you could divorce them from supply issues, because the supply would not actually be moving around. And I leaned back and I was like, oh, sounds like exchange traded funds. Sounds like the government is still uh, using the same tools and the same the same controls to control things that they don't actually have control of. So I have been you know not really excited about either these ETFs, Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever crypto ETFs, because it's not actually using the coin, and not actually um, it's not what it was made for. It seemed to me to be missing the point. But um, I don't know. It was interesting to see that this was a method that was discussed a long time ago by Treasury and by the government for a problem that we'd seen before. I don't know if I've got anything else. We didn't get to talk. We didn't even mention what's going on with the courts. Also, in our discussion of democratic institutions, I guess we can hold that off for the future. I did want to say happy birthday to Rusty. Rusty, I know it's your birthday, so happy birthday.
Thank you, Lucas, and thanks all of our listeners for joining me on my birthday for a great show. I really enjoyed the conversation today.
Are you gonna have some cake or do anything special today, Rusty?
Yeah. I was able to find a nice thick cheesecake on sale last time I went down to the store, and I got some blueberry topping to put on top of it.
Ah, delicious, delicious. Well, I will eat some cheesecake and maybe some ice cream on top of it to celebrate.
Cheesecake and ice cream.
There's you can't they're both delicious. They both improve each other. And especially because you serve cheesecake cold, you put ice cream on top, it doesn't melt. I have Norwegian genes. That I have no
I was
problem.
gonna ask, like, what exactly? Where does that come from? That seems like a regional thing, or like maybe your own family.
I
does that.
just have there's no amount of milk that I can drink milk all day long and by the gallon if it were cheaper. But that's going back to our discussion. Eggs and milk, whatever.
All right. Well, I enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to think about this stablecoin thing some more. We've talked about it a lot, but this is kind of a new idea to me. I really got to think about this because you're planting a seed in my head that I hadn't really thought through. So maybe we'll got a couple of ideas for things to talk about in the future if there's projects out there that are actually doing something like this. And now you've inspired me to go look and see if this is actually being done.
Well, Chia is the blockchain to do it. I don't know if anyone's doing it. Maybe we ought to lead that charge, but we'll talk about it more in the future. I'm glad I'm planting seeds.
All right. We'll talk soon.